Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining. I'm David Gomez and I am doing another 31 by 31 interview for the Hispanic Heritage Month for the Latino Business Speaker Bureau. And today I have the honor of introducing Judy Ryan, who is the CEO and founder of LifeWork Systems. Judy, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, David. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking your time to share your story, and that's something that we're really looking forward to it. So,
Thank you.
if you don't mind, will you tell us about your journey and what led you to find LifeWork Systems?
Well, I think even when I was a pretty young person, I could see that the human systems we have were not really working. Like we have a lot of superior, inferior, parent over, adult over child or boss over employee. And I could see that there were a lot of better ways to do things. And mainly it was because back in the mid 80s, I was introduced to a particular psychology model that is just now becoming a little more mainstream. And it was the psychology of Alfred Adler. And what happened for me was I learned about this model in relationship to my parenting of my 5 kids.
Okay.
And I became a parent educator. And what that caused for me was a huge personal experience in how much better we can be in any type of community than I had ever really believed possible before that. So from the time I learned that model, started teaching that model, started, becoming an expert in that model, that's when I've had the passion the whole time. So about 1998, I quit everything else I was doing and I went into this full time. And then in 2002, I created my own company. But what I really most like about it is it honored a lot of the values that I believe the Hispanic people hold dear. The value in the family. Even when we're a business, we're really like a family. And we need to have a functional, healthy family, not a dysfunctional family. Mm-hmm. So values like kindness and thoughtfulness and respect and kind of revering each other no matter what our age or our title. I see those as really Hispanic values, and also the values that build trustworthiness between people, like really listening and really being able to be open with each other and being straight about what we want and need and expect with, a caring attitude to it. So I just saw that so many of the things that I knew brought the best out in people were in this model that I had discovered.
Okay. So, and you said that was at an early age?
It was in my mid-20s.
Okay.
So I had kids fairly early. I ended up with 5 kids. We had a really unconventional family. I learned how to remove things like punishment and using bribery like a lot of people do, and using things like bestowing judgment. Mm-hmm. You know how people will say, even in a workplace, I'm really disappointed in you, or, oh, go make me proud. Yeah. Or even to be aware of if I was pampering or spoiling my kids, which would enable them and make them less strong. Mm-hmm. So when I learned about how do you create conditions to bring out the best in a human being, it was also something that helped me to develop better as a human being. So that led to us having family meetings where even our 4 and 5-year-olds knew how to run the meeting, where they were learning how to develop themselves as leaders. And me, a dominant mother, I had to learn how to be a good follower of a 5-year-old because I would otherwise steamroll them. So it just taught a lot of really amazing interpersonal skills and strengths that I don't think a lot of people know about.
Yeah. So I looked at your company, and so you have a great value proposition. I think it goes along with what you're saying about how to deal with people. And so could you elaborate on why diversity and culture transformation are such a great asset to organizations?
Well, I think diversity, as it states, is really appreciation of differences. And we have a society where generally we are taught and we see modeled, I'm right, you're wrong. I'm good, you're bad. This is better, this is less. This is power over, this is power under. And so really diversity is a deep delight in the differences and looking for the gifts and treasures of those. And you can't really have that outside of a psychologically safe community of people, whether it's in a business world or in our schools or in our families or in our churches. So in order to have real true diversity of thinking where it's highly beneficial, you have to have things like psychological safety and a sense of building each other. So the psychology we use is based on how do you create the conditions and conversations that do not activate people's inferiority complex or their feeling of unworthiness. So that's really at the heart of every negative behavior. So what we found is by bringing in a certain kind of culture, we automatically, it resulted in a diverse and inclusive model where people would just find that even like the barriers between the generations would start to slide away, that even the barriers between temperaments, where maybe you're a real emotional person and you feel like you have to subdue that when you're with people who are more intellectual. And in this model, people don't find those barriers because the very conditions that create struggle are alleviated. And so that's something I don't think people recognize is a bigger deal than we know. So like today, in today's world, a lot of people know who Brene Brown is, she's a famous author and speaker about shame. And even she says when she gets invited, many times people will say, Brene, you're so smart and you're so funny, but let's not talk about that shame. It's kind of dark and it makes people uncomfortable, you know? And her response is, until we deal with that, it's my #1 platform. And that was actually Adler's platform. His platform was, if you don't create the right conditions and conversations, people will go into shame. He called it inferiority feelings. And then they go into struggles inside of themselves and struggles between people. So we have rampant, you know, depression, anxiety, addiction, you know, and that's the internal. And then we have all of those wars and all of the isms and everything that comes out of that. So I think I'm answering your question, but did I get it the way you were asking?
You are, because what you're sharing with me is that, you know, it's an asset because you're building from the individual. And it just builds up to an organization that is well ran and whose contributors are well-rounded.
Exactly. And I think that it's really interesting because one of my instructors called me with all the racial issues going on right now. And she said, you need to be out there out front changing the police departments, right? And my response to her was, we don't function that way. What we do is we would take a whole set of stakeholders from a community and work with them conjointly. That's why when we did school reform, we worked from parent, teacher, administrator, even students, and part of the neighborhood, because it's a bigger problem than any one symptom. The problem is the conditions and conversations that we've come to think are good and helpful that are not. Right. And so what we do is we start educating people about how do you let go of the kinds of tactics that treat people like puppets, and how do you instead develop their internal motivation, develop their care about what they cause other people, develop their purpose and values that in such a way that they operate from them. And it's a pretty big jump. So what I see people doing is if they don't know that you need to dismantle these control tactics and then build something completely different, they'll take these wonderful caring tools and lay them on top of control models. And then they'll wonder why they don't work. Yeah. So, you know, when it comes to really a true change process, it can never come from the police are the fault or this racial group is the problem. It's always got to be about what system, if it were put in place, would fix this problem, which is a very different question than who's to blame and why is this happening? Yeah.
You're more focused on the solution.
And that it is really a systems thinking. Our company used to be called in the beginning Expanding Human Potential, which is a beautiful name, but I changed it on purpose, which sounds a little more, I don't know, engineering oriented, to being LifeWork systems, because if you don't have a system, just like if we didn't have a system for our satellites, we wouldn't be able to use our cell phones. So if you don't have a system for human systems and you know how to update it and upgrade it, it's not going to be as effective than just throwing ideas out there. Right. And so that's part of how we have developed.
And you're looking at talent, you know, the way that I guess it's a modern approach to talent is no longer just looking at HR, but you're looking at, this is my talent pool, and I need to work with them so that they can provide the work that we're expecting from them. So
yeah, it's unfortunate. I know this is a very sweeping generalization, but we rarely come in through the HR door, even though that's a really great door for us. And usually after we win over an organization, the HR department is the ideal candidate to start taking it forward. But the model is not conventional. The one we use is not conventional. And so it is often brought in by like a operations person, somebody that's really looking at performance and productivity.
mm-hmm.
And that kind of makes the connection between, if we get the performance up, the profit's going to follow. We don't do it reverse,
Yeah.
right? So you're absolutely right. I mean, we are trying to bring it in and help an organization pick up a system, and then we're out of there so that they can become self-reliant in it.
And so in those systems, I'm also looking at the next part of the interview. So let's talk about the mentor relationship. In your experience, is there someone that has motivated you or encouraged you to pursue your goals that you can look back and reflect as, you know, they embodied what you're preaching, basically?
Yes. Yeah, well, my initial mentors were mentors in the application of Adlerian psychology and parenting. And so they were mostly parent educators when I began. But what was so powerful about your question is that mentoring itself can take many forms. Last time I spoke at the Association of Latino Professionals for America, the Alpha Group, I did a panel on coaching. And we had all these different viewpoints about mentoring and coaching. In our model, everybody's mentored all the time, every month, no matter what your title, and no exceptions. So mentoring for me initially was, how do I transfer responsibility to other people in such a way that they pick it up, so that they're supported? Just to give you an example, I was sent an article from one of my people that said, that was from the Harvard Business Review. And it was just put out last week. And it was about how more and more companies are moving away from doing annual performance appraisals. Mm-hmm. About 30% of companies are starting to try to do something different. Like, how do I spend more one-on-one time with my employees so that I take time to understand what they're going through and develop them and help them problem solve? But she pointed out to me, there's no common, consistent way they're doing it. They're just now aware that we can't afford to hire, evaluate, and rid ourselves of an employee. We have to understand how to develop them so we're not a throwaway society that creates there's a lot of bias in these annual appraisal reviews. So I mentioned that because mentoring in our model is, how do we provide support to every employee? And it doesn't mean the managers have to do all the mentoring. It just means the managers have to make sure everyone is receiving a consistent way of being mentored. But for me, when I first learned all of this, it was about, how do I pick up responsibility for things like managing my relationships, managing my own productivity, my own engagement, my own purpose and values. And then how do I teach other people to do that? So that to me is the heart of mentoring. And it also is a huge, huge part of our model, is to make sure that that's occurring with everyone.
Yeah. And this is a little off, but you know, what would be your recommendations for people to get that mentoring? Because I know a lot of people are afraid to ask for help, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, what would your advice be to, you know, for people to reach out and get that mentorship that they need?
Well, I think the first thing is to understand there's all kinds of different things we mean when we say mentoring. It's the same when we say culture. It's the same if we said parenting. You could ask 20 people and they'd all be different. So I just want you to know that the rules we have about mentoring are that they're not counseling. They're not advising. I could be your boss and I could mentor you, David, and then have you mentor me back. And in our process, it's very Socratic. There's not a lot of time where we're telling a bunch of stories about what's going on in our life. It's more like that the goal would be that the Socratic questions that are in our templates are things that would help you become self-aware real quickly and then able to manage something, or aware socially and be able to manage a relationship. So in 30 minutes a month, you get a ton done. in addition to making sure that you start by like acknowledging the things you really appreciate about the person and reminding them of the purpose and values. And so those are the kinds of things. Most people think of mentoring like coaching, where you're being taught by a more seasoned senior person. And what our mentoring is, you learn these huge amount of tools and concepts, and then you're kept using them so they don't get dusty on a shelf somewhere.
Right.
And applying them in your real life. So that's what I would say. Understand what kind of mentoring and what is the purpose of mentoring. Because our purpose is transfer of responsibility, which is very different than counseling and coaching and advising. I hope that makes sense.
So let me also ask you, I know that you're involved in a lot of Latino organizations. What sparked the interest in help Latinos succeed professionally?
Well, I think it accelerated for me when I was at an event. I was a speaker. I think it was one of the NHCC events. And somebody was talking about how we don't have any really strong Hispanic, figureheads. Like, maybe you'd say Martin Luther King for the African Americans and things like that. And the complaint and the assumption that was made is because we're so respectful of authority figures that we don't want to be too disruptive. And what I realized is I want to inspire more Latinos to succeed, because when we're at our best, we know that real authority and real power is based in love. We're not saying, oh, we don't have a strong enough values, some kind of thing we can put into the contributions. Love is the most powerful thing. And making practical applications of love is true authority. So I think the Hispanic people even need to remember that, rather than think we need somebody that's more aggressive to lead the movements. No, we don't. We just need to continue to be more excited about and courageous to express the things we're already doing well. So that's kind of where I felt like I made a deeper and stronger commitment to be supportive in that whole field.
So let's move on to the next part of our interview. And one of the things that we're asking our members, because we're, this is for Hispanic Heritage Month, for you to tell us how you keep your Hispanic heritage alive.
I would say it's mostly through traditions in my family and conversations about our own ancestry and what we've learned, the good, the bad, and the ugly that have come from it. So that's the main way that I personally keep it going. I feel like by supporting a value-based way of operating, that is being faithful to my heritage, even my spirituality, which was based in what a lot of Hispanics are Catholic. I was raised Catholic. Also just even a healthy respect for authority. I think it's so funny because we talk about how baby boomers were taught, like myself, you have to earn respect and you should respect people for their age and contribution. And I don't know that I always believe it all in the first one. I believe that we should be giving each other respect without an age requirement or an experience requirement. Right. But I also see the value in remembering that we are living upon the shoulders of those that came before us. And that means that we express that appreciation. And it doesn't mean that the millennials, I'm using them as an example, are wrong to say, why can't the baby boomers respect us to begin with? And why can't they learn from us? Because we can go on social media or the internet and become a subject matter in something we're excited about, and maybe able to teach them faster than our age group could in the past. So there's a lot of things that I think, even as Hispanics, we need to revise the flexibility and the breadth of what we believe so that it is also updating with where our world is going. I hope that kind of makes sense with what you're saying.
Yeah, and that is something that I have witnessed. A lot of younger Latinos start acting a little detached from their culture. It is a good thing, to reach out to them. And I think that you have the right approach with the systems that you're working with, trying to connect them, not so much correct them, It's
Right. Well, and it's easy for younger people to get impatient and think, well, nothing's going to change if you don't see where you need to change. But one of my favorite quotes is a quote about change blindness. And it says that we have a real problem right now with change blindness because we can see new facts that are showing up, new trends, the speed of change, how complex everything is. And we can say, that's nice for them, but I don't want to go out of my way. So that's number one. Like I just became a vegan. I have to go out of my way a little bit to be a better vegan, to be a good vegan. And it's the same with our evolution. But the bigger problem, he said, is that we don't like to consider that our ideas or our mindset could be outdated. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a really dangerous thing that does frustrate younger people because we want to take what we know and we want to make sure we're upgrading it. None of us would be ashamed if we got a new phone. We'd even look forward to the improvement, and we wouldn't be ashamed of the old phone. But when it comes to human systems, there's a lot of ego often involved where people are concerned about, well, if I am not up to date anymore, if I'm outdated in the way I'm thinking, then I'm irrelevant. And that's not true. You just have to be willing to go, wow, maybe there's a new, better, improved way to build upon. Mm-hmm. And I can even be a leader in that if I don't get so hung up on, I don't want to be outdated. So that's what I see as the biggest problem is people still, when it comes to human systems, they just go back to what they know and say, well, that was okay before, it's good enough now, even though it isn't good enough now.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an openness to change. And it's, it's not that common. And I've noticed that when you're bringing new ideas and there's a very rigid corporate structure, seems to be very resistant to that.
Yes, part of the problem is only 8% of the population are systems thinkers to begin with. So most people aren't out there thinking about the larger patterns and creating a system to be responsive to that. But I think even more importantly, we feel like, well, we got this system, we can't just throw it out. Well, you can if it's not working. Right. And so you're right. I mean, organizations get very attached to something that they've invested a lot of time in. But when you think about like the Sears company, they refused to grow with the times and now they're gone, and Amazon is the replacement because they could see the digital age coming. And it's really the hardest thing. That the most progressive people in the world are the ones that are constantly staying aware of the trends and understanding that things are speeding up and they're way more complicated, and we need new systems to help that process continue to be effective. And I just think that it kind of takes a positive, strong ego to do that. And I mean that in a good way. Right. A really strong ego isn't afraid to make other people powerful. They're not afraid to change or update or, consider that they're outdated and they want to think new. Yeah. And so. Ego as in psychology, a really strong, positive ego is operating out of love. It's not operating out of fear. So what I see in the organizations that tend to resist change is they're super fearful of their own, their own loss of identity or loss of prestige or something like that, as opposed to going, wow, I can help more people become leaders now. Yeah. So I think what's going to change that is people seeing more success. So when you read about these companies that are making these tremendous changes in their culture, you're going to see the cultures are going to be described like the ones we use, but they're still not mainstream. So it almost takes enough people having success for other ones to go, I think I want what they have. Yeah. So. And you're a trailblazer, basically. We're trailblazing. And I want to do that with innovative leaders and change agents. And so one of our visions is to be a global entity, and we're starting to do more with other countries. And, our first translation is going to be Spanish. That's good. But right now we're trying to expand to countries where English is spoken and where democracy is fairly common, as opposed to, an autocratic society. They would hate our model. Well, I could talk to you for 3 or 4 hours. I know. Feel like you're very interesting, and I love all of the insight that you have. Thank you.
So let me just ask you, let me just ask you our last question. And this is something that we're trying to gather from all of our members. Could you share with us any projects that you're working on right now and anything that's on the horizon?
Yeah, right now, one of the projects I'm really excited about is, and I know this is just one, but it's the one that popped in my head. We had done several large school reform projects back in the early days of our company. And it was interesting because I created a vision that said, hey, I was a parent that didn't have parents around me or teachers around me that understood this model. So wouldn't it be cool if I could recreate this model and make it so that everybody in the student's life would have the same concepts and tools. Right. And so when the opportunity showed up, somebody said to me, what would you do if you could do whatever you wanted? And I said, oh, that's real easy. And I just spelled it out. And she said, oh, well, I've got this $300,000 grant application. It's due in 2 days. Wow. I don't have time to fill it out. So if you write it and I like it, I'll sign it. And we won a $300,000 grant within, we started a month later. And then we had an $800,000 grant. Well, now one of the things, even though our work is mostly not with schools right now, it's mostly with corporations and nonprofits and government settings. We just pitched an idea to Build-A-Bear because we had pitched an idea back when Maxine Clark owned the company, where it would be a cause marketing project where they would add on, and instead of just Build-A-Bear, they'd have Build a Healthy Family, Build a Healthy School. And that would, because as a parent of 5 children, I wasn't interested in buying stuffed animals every year for my kids. But if they would have had parent training and my teachers could have been there, I would have been there every week, probably bought a lot more bears. Yeah. So we just went back to them because now is the time where it would help for them to diversify. They're hurting like everybody else with their stores closed down. And it would also, it's a time in our culture where people need these ideas to start in childhood. So we're hoping they're going to talk to us in early 2021. So that's a project that involves the stakeholders around a child's life, for example.
Yeah.
And so those are the kinds of things we're looking for, and truly in partnership with innovators. I would love to do something for what's going on with the racial injustice. It's just hard to get people to realize it's not about just about chokeholds. It's really about mindset. Yeah. So I always ask in my own spirituality, I always say, send me the people who are hungry for what we have, because I know those are the people I'm here to serve, not to go find and convert anybody that's not interested in growing.
Right. No, and it seems like you're really getting something that I think it's ahead of its time a little bit. But
I've been told that. I just hope it's not like Van Gogh that I have to die before it comes into vogue.
No, I don't think that's the case. I like you said, the companies that you're approaching, it's in the approach itself is very innovative. I mean, you're approaching Build-A-Bear.
Thank you.
You know, who would have thought that you could really delve into what they do to provide what you're giving.
Create something new in the world. Well, right. It just so happened their director of HR years ago had been trained in my model. And she was like, we got to get you in with Maxine Clark. Maxine Clark was all over it, and then she sold the company. So now we're talking to the new people. But I think the important thing is, I appreciate you saying it's ahead of its time, because honestly, when I was introduced to this, I knew that it was out ahead of time. Yeah. And that's why when I read about Adler and they said he was 100 years ahead of his time, I'm like, yeah, I know. But I do feel like our time is now. Yeah. Because the world is so hungry for true systemic change. Yeah. And if it's not right now, it'll be here soon, but it feels like it's here now. And that we're even kind of aligning with a lot of the trends that are happening: diversity and inclusion, agile, digital transformation, gig economy, gig projects, really a whole slew of trends are. That's why we even have a whole set of industry articles on our website, so that people make the connection between, here's the trends that are coming, here's the culture that is needed for those to succeed.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much. It's a lot of information, but it's also good, you know?
You're so funny. And I'm a very big talker about this. My daughter said to me, my youngest said to me one time, I wish I had your work ethic. And I said, you do. And she said, what are you talking about? And I said, you stay up all night to play video games. And she goes, yeah, but that's fun. And I said, when you find what you're really here to do,
Right.
You're not looking around going, oh man, do I have to put in another hour? You're really having fun. And I feel happy to be able to say that that's how I feel about this work. At least most days, right, David?
Yeah.
So.
Well, just want to thank you. I don't want to take, a lot of your time. I know you're busy, but really a pleasure to get to talk to you. And
same here.
I feel like I'm picking your brain little by little, and
yeah. Is there anything you feel that I missed or?
No. And I just kind of wish we had more time, because I think that when you were sharing some of those ideas, I was like, okay, I want to know more about that. I want to know a little more about that. But
it sounds like we need to do a separate call.
yeah, that's something that I'm going to be bringing to the team and say, hey, we really can expand on the points that Judy was making.
David, you are the epitome of how I feel about my Hispanic people when I'm working with. I feel like it's easy. I feel like it's joyful. I feel like there's no resistance to the values. Mm-hmm. And I feel it with you, and I'm really grateful for it.
Oh, thank you.
It's probably made me way more talkative than you wanted, and you might have to edit out a few parts to keep it the right size.
They'll fix it. I know they have a team that they're gonna go back in there and be like, okay, we're gonna put this in. But yeah, so I have no worries about that.
Okay.
Well, once again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and to share what you're passionate about. And
you're so welcome. I'm grateful back.
All right, team, thank you so much for tuning in. And this has been another 31 by 31 interviews. Thank you so much.